morning. I'm interviewing Mrs. Pace for the oral history of Ashland. So, tell me why you came to Ashland.
Well, my husband Jay got a job as associate editor with the newspaper, the Herald Progress, and with covering night meetings and all, it got to be tough driving back to Richmond, and so we moved in 1974.
Okay. So you lived in Richmond. How was the commute? How was Ashland different in 1973?
Than it is now?
Yes.
Well, what we call the messy mile was not here at that point, I don't think. And we lived right in town, and when we moved, I had a 3-year-old and was very pregnant with my daughter, and I imagine there's probably more traffic now, but we let the kids kind of roam and in the neighborhood, and they didn't have cell phones to keep in constant contact and that sort of thing. And it was a very nice small town atmosphere.
Okay. Can you describe the community or first neighborhood you lived in?
Okay, I lived on Henry Clay Road in Old Victorian. It was built in 1886 at the end of the first block. When we moved there, it was more an older neighborhood, so there weren't a whole lot of children for my children to play with until they got to school and Little League and that sort of thing. But very nice, fairly quiet, but we were 1 block from the railroad tracks, so the train whistles, everybody said you would get used to them, but I still woke up. I know a train whistle blew at 3:30 in the morning because I woke up a lot at 3:30 in the morning.
Okay. How is Ashland growing up for your kids? Do they enjoy it here? Your kids?
They did very much, and it was very nice being right in town, with Little League. I could drop my kids off at Little League practice and come on home and then pick them up, and it wasn't any big deal. Whereas these people that came in from 10 miles out, they were just kind of stuck here for an hour. So that was nice. They both said when they got married and started looking at houses that they would never live in Ashland because everybody knows your business. But my daughter has said now, she said that she realizes that, there were good points about that as well.
Okay. What did you do for fun in Ashland, entertainment-wise?
Well, the movie theater was, up and running at that point. Both kids were involved in Little League, so we did that in school sports. Running a newspaper, the 2 of us, and I joined the paper in 76. We didn't have a whole lot of spare time.
Oh, okay. So that was your first job in Ashland, the newspaper?
Right.
Okay, and you were there for how long?
Oh, golly. We sold the paper in 2004. We had signed the letter of agreement, and in March, my husband died April 12th, and so the sale went through after his death, but he was in on the decision of who to sell it to.
That's good. For your children growing up in Ashland, did you have doctors in town, or
Oh yes, Dr. Lee was the local pediatrician, and I don't know of any other pediatricians when my kids were coming along. And I went to Dr. Carter for a while, and now go to Dr. Ganley.
That's nice. How was schooling? What school did they attend?
They attended the public schools, so Henry Clay and Gandy and Liberty and Patrick Henry. They were in sort of a transition between Liberty becoming a middle school from being a junior high.
Okay.
Chris, I think, went all the way through 7th grade at Gandy, but Liz switched over there at 6th grade.
Okay. Did they learn anything else special in school? Did they have any special programs for your kids?
Well, both of them were in TAG program, Talented and Gifted, which was, it's probably gotten more organized now, but it was a sort of after-school project. And I remember Chris, at one point, they had some sort of tournament to go to, and he had a Little League baseball game. And he couldn't decide, which to do. And I decided that was not going to be my decision, because whatever I decided, he'd be upset about. So, I just told him, I said, well, just think of it this way. On your baseball team, there's like 12, 15 kids, whereas on your tag team, there's only about 6. So he decided to go with the tag.
That's good. So your kids are very involved in sports? All children? Or?
Not real involved. They did the Little League baseball and softball, and then Liz did the softball at Liberty, but she had a hard time adjusting from the slow pitch to the fast pitch. I think the Little League is fast pitch now.
Okay.
And Chris was on the baseball team for a couple of years.
Okay, so for local business purposes, like where do you shop at back in 1973?
Well, of course, Cross Brothers
Okay.
was an institution, and I can remember when we first moved here, I was making something, and the recipe called for something that I didn't have, and I ran up to Cross's to get it, and they were closed because it was after 6 o'clock. It was like, oh, and I think there was a Safeway at that point, but they were closed too. So I was like, okay, if I'm going to make a recipe in the evening, I got to make sure I have all my ingredients.
Yes. So there was a Safeway here?
There was a Safeway. It's where, in the area where Divas is now, down on England Street.
Okay. And
before it was Divas, at some point there was a Golden Skillet there also, which was a chicken place.
Did you shop along the railroad tracks, all the local businesses?
We did quite a bit of that, because we could find stuff here, but also because we were the newspaper and we depended on them for advertising, so it was important for us to shop locally.
That's nice. What do you think about the newer businesses like Aspen Coffee and Tea, Suzanne's, the Iron Horse Restaurant?
I love it. Anything that is successful here in Ashland, I think, helps the whole community.
Oh, that's good. So how did you feel about Walmart coming into town?
I was not in favor of it. It's just not, what you envision Ashland as being. But I sort of felt once it was here, and I can see why the town council had to approve it because the zoning was already there. And it was sort of, they were caught between a rock and a hard place. And once it was there, it was sort of like, okay, it's here. But, there's not much we can do about it now. So.
Yeah. So do you shop there now? Or?
I do some shopping there. Yeah.
Okay, that's nice. So compared to 1973 and now, how is Ashland different from then, 1973?
Well, of course, it's by law it took some of the county property, so it's bigger both acreage wise and people wise. It still retains a lot of that small town atmosphere. We try to kind of insulate ourselves somewhat sometimes from the rest of the world, and it's very different from over in Mechanicsville, which doesn't seem to have a sort of central core area and identity.
Okay. You talked about living near the railroad tracks. So, what do you remember about it? Do you know anything special? Any, different type of people coming off the train or anything?
Well, we didn't have service to Ashland for a long time. That wasn't until, I think, the 1980s
Okay.
that we actually had trains stopped to let people on and off. there was a gentleman named Schertz Blanton who used to work for the railroads and then had a terrible accident, I think, with the railroad, but I'm not sure about that.
Oh, okay.
And he lived in the big White House at the end of Henry Clay Road on the railroad tracks, and so he would. The story is that he would wave to every train that went by to the conductor. I think, like, you know, even at 3:30 in the morning.
Wow.
But you know, he loved the trains so much, and
Okay.
so he wanted to have, you know, keep some little connection with it.
That's nice. So, did your family attend a church around here?
Yes, we went to St. James the Less for about 20 years, and then I was senior warden, and there was some disagreement over the current priest that was there, and being senior warden, I was sort of took the hit, and the new person that came on just wasn't giving me what I needed to replenish myself, and so we went to church down in Richmond for a while, and then they started a new church over in the Atlee area called All Souls Episcopal Church, and my husband Jay was very interested in church, what they call church planting, and so that's kind of why we moved, and then we just fell in love with the rector there, and we were going there when Jay died, and he did a wonderful job with the funeral. So we're with him still now, and then the kids both go there too.
Oh, so your kids live around here?
Yes, they both live in Hanover County.
Okay.
And one's about 8 minutes away, and one's about 15 minutes away. So, and they both have families. So.
Okay. What do your children do? If you don't mind.
Well, my son and daughter-in-law are both teachers. My son Chris teaches at Hanover High,
Okay.
and my daughter-in-law teaches at Benedictine, and they have 2 girls, Maggie and Katie. And then my daughter is at Capital One, and she's in the human resources area, and she changes jobs every so often, and I never quite understand what it is that she does, but and my son-in-law just got hired by Henrico Fire Department, so he's right now at the Fire Academy and will become a firefighter.
That's nice.
And they've got a daughter also, Peyton. Don't want to leave her out.
Yes. Do you know any like historic stories of Ashland, like what the oldest house is in the community, or any history?
Well, the houses along the railroad tracks were built as summer residences for railroad people, so that they could, get out from the hot city and come to Ashland. So I would imagine the oldest ones are right along the railroad tracks. Like I said, mine's back at the end of that first block, and it was built in 1886.
Oh.
So those were probably, the first one's probably more like the 1850s or 60s, maybe even earlier.
Yeah.
I do have one small town while we're talking about houses story. When my husband and I had planned to retire to the Outer Banks, where we had vacationed for years and years and years. And we bought a house in Southern Shores with that in mind, and but had not sold the paper yet, so we weren't going anywhere until we did that. And I was at a church function, and my neighbor came up to me and said, "Well, thanks for telling me that you'd sold your house." Mm-hmm. And I went, "Wait a minute, I sold my house. Who did I sell it to? How much did I get for it? And so that's sort of how, someone had heard that we bought a house on the Outer Banks, and people knew that we were planning to retire there, so they thought that it was imminent, and we'd already sold the house. So, that's sort of how things happen sometimes in small towns.
Yeah. Do you like the small town community compared to
I
Richmond?
really do. I really do. Particularly when Jay died, it was. It was very good.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Do you have any memories from your kids growing up? The childhood memories, your favorite ones?
Golly, lots of good memories. One that, of course, the Ashland Variety Show. We were always in that, and they always called it a variety show rather than a talent show, so that anybody who wanted to could be in it, which is the only reason I got to be in it. But the family was all involved with that, and Jay actually was the musical director for several years before he died. He was the musician in the family. The Little League games, I remember when Chris first started Little League, I bought knitting and a pattern and yarn, and I was going to knit because I don't like baseball. Well, I got about 2 rows done the whole time he was in baseball, because once, it's your child up there and your child's friends, you become much more interested in the game. And Liz, of course, with her softball. And Chris, at one point, probably when he was maybe about 10, Patrick Henry did Oliver as their spring musical, and he was one of the orphans. That's one of his claims to fame. Then I have some stories of when they were teenagers that I don't think need to be recorded for history.
No.
But Liz's very best friend, Lara Mills Brown now, and she have stayed friends since they were about age 7, and that's just been a really neat thing to have, and perhaps in a not small town atmosphere that that they wouldn't have been able to keep that.
That's good. Are you involved in any clubs around Ashland, or like any?
Well, right now I'm on the Hanover Arts and Activities Center board. My term runs out at the end of June, and I'm not renewing. I'm real involved with my church. I'm senior warden again at my new church, and just decided to help out with the financial aspect of it, because we have 2 treasurers, one who does the intake and one who does the outgo, and the intake person's been doing it for like 4 years, so she was ready for a break. So I'm no longer senior warden, but getting organized to take over that one treasurer position. I'm also somewhat involved in the Friends of the Library, and I drive on Thursdays for the Red Cross.
Okay.
And that's people who either because of age or circumstances don't have their own transportation, and that's a very rewarding job. I got involved with that because of another friend of my daughter's used to be the director of it, and so after I retired, I was looking for something to do, and now I'm more busy than I ever want to be. But I said, well, I can drive, and I've got maps and I've got MapQuest, but MapQuest can send you wrong. I have learned that the hard way, but just most everybody is just real appreciative, and I I've learned a lot about the area too.
Okay, for the arts and activities, what type of stuff do you do? Like, could we pass the building? Coming
Yes,
so-
yeah. Yeah, that was an old church, and it was used as a hospital during the Civil War. So it's, well, so it was before
Okay.
before the Civil War that, that building was in existence. Um, they do a lot of things. They have one big hall that they rent out for for weddings and that sort of thing. They have several people who are artists who rent little rooms, and they have that for for lessons or for a studio. There's a play school down in the basement, a cooperative play school that my daughter was in for a semester. And the things that the board does, the variety show that's every other year benefits the Arts Activity Center. So everybody's kind of involved in that. The railroad run that we had just about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, is run by the Arts and Activity Center and benefits them. We do Bluemont concerts in the summer. We do 4th of July parade and apple pie contest and that sort of thing. Every other year they also do a house tour at Christmas time. So it does a lot of stuff. Oh, and then just this year they did for Black History Month, they did a wonderful program at Blackwell Auditorium that I think they're in conjunction with the AARP, and I think they're going to make that an annual event. And for a while, we for a couple of years, we started a classic film program where once a month we would have, during the winter months, we would have a film in the old theater. And so it was, being used, somewhat as a movie theater again. And then there was problems with the rental and with the roof and what have you. So I don't know if we'll start that up again, but I would like to see that come back.
Yeah. So there's a lot of like festivals and stuff over the summer in Ashland.
Well, there's the Strawberry Fair, which is in June, and that's always very well attended. And the Herald Progress always had a booth there, and it was nice. And there's also a tomato festival that's over on the other side of the county, and that's in July, but Ashland has nothing to do with that other than the Herald Progress helps to sponsor it. And it was always so much nicer heat-wise to do the Strawberry Fair than the Tomato Festival. It was like, oh no, it's going to be 95 again this year.
Yeah. So is there any like other entertainment were they have a carnival in Ashland growing up?
I do remember one time a traveling circus coming to town, and that's sort of all I remember, except that they did have a tent and they did have some animals, and the kids loved it.
Do you remember like when this happened?
And it might have been more than one time, but I only remember one. And the children were fairly little, so it was probably in the 70s, maybe early 80s.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Do you know anyone that attended Randolph-Macon, or?
My husband went there. Yeah. So, and our best buddies. The man went there. When Jay went there, it was all male. See, went there in the 60s, and I went to Mary Washington, which was all female. So we met on a blind date. And just, I've known lots of people, and my husband liked basketball and got me to be a basketball nut. So I go to all the home, or most of the home, basketball games. He used to also broadcast on the local radio station the football and basketball games for Randolph-Macon. And, knew some of his professors. Of course, most of them have passed on by now, if not all of them. And so, I know Mike Rhodes, and he knows me, but, we don't socialize. But
okay. Did you go to any events at Randolph-Macon while your husband attended there, or?
Well, we went to Camptown Races for a couple of years. We met his junior year, was my senior year. And so, we did a few weekends dating, and then he went to graduate school at LSU. And after 1 year, came back and was public relations director at the college. So we attended lots of functions there, and he had barely gotten the seat warm when he had to do the inauguration for Luther White, who was the new president of the college. So, he kind of earned his stripes right from the beginning, the hard way. So, of course, we attended functions, but the children were little at that point, so there were a lot of things that, he had to attend that I couldn't because of babysitting problems. But we all enjoyed the basketball games, and the kids remember now, and we've got grandchildren coming to the basketball games, but the oldest one is only 3, but Chris remembers that, they really didn't care a whole lot about that basketball game, but they would go over into the old gym, or which we called the alumni gym, and play their own basketball game. So yeah, we're starting a third generation of watching basketball games.
Yes. In what ways did having a college in the town affect your life, even with your kids?
Well, it was because we lived a block from the campus. It was a place where they could go and be safe and run around, and I learned later that they would occasionally sneak out at night, and they would just go to Randolph-Macon and sit on the bleachers of the football field, or something like that. At least that's what they've told me so far. But yeah, and I used to walk in the campus a lot, and it's a real pretty place, and took advantage of some of the cultural opportunities, but it was sort of like when I was in college. That's one thing I told my kids I regret, that we had these really national symphony and all kinds of things coming, and I don't feel like going. And I wish I'd done more of that. So
earlier, before you were talking about the Civil War house, how do you know any stories about the Civil War in Ashland, or any history from it?
Other than that, the Arts Activity Center was a hospital, and it was a Baptist church also. Yeah, that's all. And I'm from Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So my husband was from Richmond, so I got a snoot full about the Civil War, but.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any memories of Ashland that you remember, anything?
I know. I just felt like it was a safe place for my children to grow up, and you got good friends, and I don't think I grew up in the suburbs, and I had friends at school, but they were scattered, and so this is they're a little more concentrated.
Okay, so to follow up on that question, why do you love Ashland? The same.
For basically the same reasons. yeah, when we were going to retire to the Outer Banks, of course, we loved that place as well. But I was sort of saying, I'm not sure I want to leave my friends. And now both of my children have stayed in the area too. So, so when Jay died, I said, well, I'm going to stay right here. I'm not moving down there without a husband. But I kept the house. First thing was, I got to sell this house, and then I went down, and it was over 100 years younger than the house I was currently living in. The refrigerator had an ice maker in it, and I had closets and all that kind of neat stuff. And I said, I don't want to get rid of this house. So as long as I can afford to keep it, I will keep it. And we bought it for the grandchildren to have a place to come to. So.
Good. Is there anything else you like to tell us, or any other stories?
I'll probably think of something when you've turned it off, like Mrs. Majette. But I can't think of anything right offhand. Other than I really didn't touch a whole lot on our owning the newspaper. We bought the paper in 1981, and it was a wonderful transition from the Watkins family. They really treated us almost like children, and we used the same CPA and the same attorney, and they just, we worked out an agreement that we could afford to pay, and they could afford to live on when they retired, and it was hard being the newspaper owner. I just did the financial part of it, which was not tough, but my husband was out there in the front lines, and when he'd write an editorial that was controversial sometimes, I would go, oh no, why did you say that? And he was perfect for the job, because he always said, well, if you got people complaining, at least they're reading it. It's when you don't hear anything that you know that you don't count. And I will tell one story about one of my favorite cartoons that we had, that my husband discovered this kid when he was still at Lee Davis High School, and then went to VCU, and he was our editorial cartoonist. And I probably don't have the story quite right, but at Liberty Junior, the girls who were maybe the officers of the Student Government Association, they had a class period or after school, I'm not quite sure which, but apparently at one point they did, like most people at least hear of doing, if not doing, they decided to Xerox their butts on the Xerox machine. And this was supposed to be during student government thing, and the teacher was supposed to be there and whatever. And so our cartoonist did this cartoon of a kiosk, and there's all these magazines around. There's Playboy and Hustler and Playgirl, and then he had the Girls of Liberty. Well, you just never heard such a fracas over that. I just thought it was a great cartoon, but until, and our kids were of the age, they weren't quite there yet, but we knew lots of kids who were, and, wasn't just these girls' mothers, but all of Liberty Junior High parents were mad at us for that cartoon. And I remember my Jay's comment was, haven't people heard of irony? So that was sort of, sometimes the danger of owning the local newspaper.
Yeah. So I went to the library and I saw your husband, his statue.
Oh, right, yeah. The librarians and various people have said that particularly children will come and sit up beside them and try to read what's on the paper, which is quotes from two of his editorials, one at the very beginning of his tenure and one at the very end. And I said, well, that's exactly, what I had in mind, that people could come and sit beside him. And Jay was also, he was a wonderful employer, but he also was very good at giving employment advice to people who left. And he always told his reporters when they came on, he said, when you're ready to move on, let me know. I'll help you get a job, at a place where I think you should go. Or if I don't think you're ready, I'll let you know that. And so it was always a very open thing. And people would contact him 10, 15 years later saying, I want to change jobs again. What should I do? And his advice always was, do what you have a passion for, what gives you energy and not what takes energy away.
Yeah. I don't have any questions unless you would like to say any other story from the paper.
No, other than that, I'd sort of learned to deal with the controversy because, anytime you take a stand on something, there are going to be, some people for it and some people against it. Oh, I do have one story that they were talking about in the town, and we lived in the area where they were talking about coming up with a historic area. I'm not sure if that was the official title for it, but the kind of place where you'd have to go through a architectural review board to change the color of your house or to put an addition on or, that sort of thing. Well, everybody was just up in arms over it, and so the town council meeting was just packed, and somebody stood up, and they had advertised it in the Herald Progress. Somebody stood up and said, well, why did I have to hear about this the day before the meeting and blah, blah, blah. And so someone said, well, we advertised it in the Herald Progress. And this guy pipes up with, well, why didn't you put it in a real paper? And so my husband had to sort of hold me back. But, yeah, so, you get all kinds of things and you learn to deal with them. But I was majored in Latin and taught Spanish and English and Latin for 4.5 years until I was pregnant with Chris. So I wasn't real equipped to, be in the communications field, although I knew my grammar.
So you taught in Richmond or?
Well, I taught 4.5 years, and I taught in 4 schools. My first year out, because I graduated a year before Jay, I was in Baltimore County. And then we got married, and I taught a year in Ellis in Louisiana at Baton Rouge. Then I was at Henrico High for a year, and then finally a Latin position opened up at Tucker. And so my last year and a half I taught at J.R. Tucker.
Good memories of the paper.
Pardon?
I was like, just good memories of the paper and everything.
Yes, yeah. Good employees, and, of course, it has its ups and downs, and we never made a whole lot of money, but that was not our goal. Our goal was to serve and inform the community, so we probably could have made more money, but we had enough that we never had to borrow money for our kids to go to school. Of course, they went to state school. They didn't go to Randolph-Macon. So...
Well, thank you very much for your time.
You are quite welcome, and this was not nearly as bad as I thought.